Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Washington Bureau Chief Tia Mitchell. After the death of Congressman David Scott, Georgia's 13th Congressional District was put in an unusual political moment. There is one race now underway to fill his seat for the rest of the year, but there was another race to decide who would represent the district for the next full term that begins in January. It may sound like the same thing, but it's not. The special election now underway is about who can step in immediately, inherit the constituent work, the casework, and represent the district through January. And then the November general election will determine who gets to truly shape the next era as the congressperson from the 13th Congressional District, following in the footsteps of David Scott, who served more than 2 decades. And in today's episode, we're looking at both tracks. So first, I'm going to talk to State Representative Jasmine Clark, who was one of the first people to enter the primary to challenge Representative Scott before he passed away. And then when he died on April 22nd, the entire race changed entirely. She won the Democratic primary outright in May, avoiding a runoff in a crowded field, and now is the favorite to win election in November in a district that is heavily Democratic. So let's hear from Representative Clark. Rep. Clark, likely soon to be also U.S. Rep. Clark. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's get right into it. So what I find so interesting about the 13th Congressional District race is that, first of all, you are the Democratic nominee, and you're very likely to win in November because it is a heavily Democratic district. So, for all intents and purposes, you are headed to Congress in January. But I want to back up and talk about how you got here. And initially, when you qualified to run in Georgia's 13th Congressional District, you were challenging the incumbent, who was David Scott. But he died shortly before early voting began. How did you shift, or did you shift at all your campaign or your approach when it did change from challenging David Scott to now running to succeed him in office?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the truth is, we didn't really have to change much about our messaging. So the way that campaigns work is you have a campaign plan that starts months before the election happens. And our campaign plan had always been to focus on the issues and to focus on bringing a science voice to the United States government with all the things that were going on with, RFK and with cuts to healthcare in a number of different ways, Medicaid, ACA, and things like that, and the threats to scientific research funding. I felt like I was a very niche candidate. And so our goal from the beginning was always to just get that message out there, but also bring home the message that I have been fighting for the people of House District 108, which sits in Congressional District 13. I had already been fighting for them. And so I wanted to continue to be that fighter in Washington, D.C. And so that was our message. And we really did not have to pivot that much, despite the loss of Congressman Scott a couple of weeks before early voting began.
So on that note about your campaign, you had the privilege of having a lot of outside support. There were organizations who want to elect more women, more Democratic women supporting you. And when I say support, I mean money. You had an organization that wants to put more scientists into Congress that was supporting you. And then you had crypto money supporting you. So tell me, I feel like the scientists and the women in office, kind of self-explanatory, but the crypto money, can you tell me a little bit about that support, what your conversations with the industry have been like since the campaign? Because, there were some people who were side-eyeing it a little bit, I guess, so to speak. But tell me what you made of getting the support from that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, I had support from a bunch of different people: environmental, people who want to see women get elected, people who want to have science voices represented in government, the youth, the Georgia Youth Commission, reproductive rights, like so many different organizations. And the truth of the matter is, for many of those organizations, I had direct contact with them because they are just PACs. When it comes to crypto, though, they are a super PAC. A super PAC is not allowed legally to coordinate with a campaign. And so, as I think about what about me might get crypto super PAC to say, this is the candidate that we would get behind, I think about the fact that I was the co-chair of the Georgia Future Caucus. We literally talked about emerging technology and, the technology of the future, things like crypto and AI and how that's impacting younger voters. And so I did have a track record of talking about those things, but also just being willing to have those conversations about how these technologies impact us. I truly believe, especially when it comes to crypto, that right now, with the lack of regulation, it leaves consumers very vulnerable. Not only does it leave consumers vulnerable, it could leave small business owners vulnerable. And if there are people that are using crypto, because let's be clear, lots of people in Congressional District 13 and across the country have some form of crypto. Maybe it's Bitcoin or this or that. I wanted to make sure that we have people at the table that are willing to stand up for consumers. And so I've never shied away from that. Even in the state legislature, had a limited amount, but we did have crypto regulation come through the state legislature. And so I was on the banks committee. So these things came to the committee that I was on. So while I cannot coordinate with a crypto super PAC and I can't know the exact reason, what I can say is that it made sense to me that someone who has a science background and someone who has a track record of caring about emerging technology, that they would take a look. But the campaign that I ran was largely focused on the tens of thousands of grassroots supporters. Even now, we're about to do our next campaign finance disclosure. And I'm really excited because we're going to report that we've raised over $500,000 just in Q2. And that's with an average donation of $26. So the grassroots support is there. And that's who I really attribute to my win for Congressional District 13.
Yeah, I want to jump in about that because you talked about the primary, which was in May. It was a pretty crowded contest. And so you surprised a lot of people, not by just getting the most votes, but winning outright, which means you got more than half of the votes from all of these Democratic candidates in the race. Were you surprised by the outcome? What did you make of the fact that the support was so large, even in a crowded field, that you did what David Scott had been able to do for so many years, which was get enough support to avoid a runoff?
We covered all of our bases. We did all of the things. And right before the primary election day, just to benchmark and kind of see where we were, we did some polling in the district, and the polling pretty much showed that I had a path to win outright without a runoff. And so surprised, absolutely, because one, polls are just polls and polls don't vote. And it really is up to you as a candidate to do the work. But two, I knew there was always a path to that happening. Again, we left no stone unturned. The campaign, had TV ads, the campaign had mail, the campaign had radio, we had door knockers. I mean, we did all of the things. And this is my fifth competitive election and we were able to prevail.
So, what made you decide? Again, this episode is all about those running to succeed David Scott and continue on in the 13th Congressional District. The special election to complete his term is underway, early voting. The election day is July 28th. You did not decide to run in the special election, which would have allowed you to have a head start, so to speak, if you won the special election. Instead, you just focused on running for a complete 2-year term. Why?
So the special election got called at a time where if I had decided to run, I would have to vacate or resign my current state house seat. When I ran in 2024, I ran for a 2-year term, and I take that very seriously, especially when at the same time we knew that the governor was going to call a special session and that special session very likely would involve drawing maps. I did not want House District 108 to be unrepresented during that process. And there were a lot of moving parts, and ultimately what drove my decision is what's best for the people that I represent. And I felt like it was best for the people that I currently represent that elected me in 2024 to be there at the state capitol, standing up for them during that process, and not just go and chase a title and leaving them, having to pick up the pieces with, again, first having no representation and then having to go through a special election. So to me, it was the best decision for my current constituents.
Well, we're almost getting to the end of our time, but I do want to just ask you quickly, as you're looking toward the future, again, you do have a general election. There will be a Republican on the ballot, but it's very likely you're going to win in November, take office in January. What are you doing to prepare to go to Congress?
I have already started having meetings. I'm already starting to think about what the November election will look like. And as you mentioned earlier, this is a pretty solidly Democratic district. So I'm not necessarily too worried about the Republican challenger. But what I do think is really important is that we have stellar turnout. And I want Congressional District 13 to be one of the districts that turns out in numbers to help the entire ticket when it comes to Democrats. I want to be able to help John Ossoff get reelected. I want to make sure that we get Keisha Lance Bottoms over the finish line, Tanya Miller, Penny Reynolds, like all of these people. I want to make sure that I am a part of being the rising tide that lifts all boats. And so we are still going to run a full-blown campaign in November. And after November, I'm ready to hit the ground running for the district. I really, truly do love this place. I'm Atlanta born and raised, and I've lived in a lot of different parts of this district. And so it's really exciting to me that I get to represent them at the federal level. And so I am looking forward to getting the ball rolling on constituent services, but also meeting with the local representation and making sure that, we're all on the same page about what the needs of the district are. So looking forward to all of those things.
Well, thank you so much, State Rep and future likely U.S. Rep Jasmine Clark. Thanks again for coming on Politically Georgia.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Representative Clark is focused on the next 2-year term in Congress. But before January, the district still needs someone to finish out Representative David Scott's current term. That is where the special election comes in. And it has a completely different cast of candidates, a different timeline, and a different purpose. After the break, we'll hear from 2 Democrats in that race. Marcye Scott, who is Congressman David Scott's youngest daughter, and Everton Blair, who is the former chairman of the Gwinnett County School Board. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. If you have a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call our hotline anytime, leave a question, and we will play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 770-810-5297. Call in because we want to hear from you. Before the break, we talked with State Representative Jasmine Clark about the full-term race for Georgia's 13th Congressional District. But now we turn to the special election. This is the race to finish the late Congressman's current term. It's a short window, but it still matters because the winner will enter Congress before the end of the year and work on things like appropriations bills, policy, spending, and also inherent constituent services from Rep. Scott's old office. We spoke separately with Marcye Scott, the late Congressman's daughter, and Everton Blair, the former Gwinnett County School Board chairman. He finished third in the primary for a full term, but he is the only candidate who decided to run for both. So now he's in the special election underway. Let's start with Everton Blair. Welcome to Politically Georgia.
Thanks for having me, Tia. It's been a minute.
I know. So let's start off by talking about this special election contest. And you are the only candidate who also was on the ballot for the primary. We know you ended in third. You did not advance in that race. But what made you, because you had to decide even before the primary voting was underway, whether you wanted to run in this special election. And again, you're the only person who decided to do both. Why did you make that decision?
I'm a lifelong resident of the district. And, having jumped in this race really early before 8 or 9 others chose to, it just became clear to me that you take the opportunities that are presented before you, especially when it gives you a chance to serve. And I did not anticipate, nor did I know who else was going to choose to jump into that race. I was actually kind of shocked that I was the only one. But, we've been running for so long and running so strong that many of the issues that we were centering just couldn't go by the wayside. So I wanted to continue to center all of the needs of the families in Georgia's 13th district, the things that I was seeing on the campaign trail, and honestly, the energy and the enthusiasm that I was seeing that we could continue to bring and build on with this opportunity to change direction and change our leadership. So it was a no-brainer for me.
So you're now running in the special election, but again, we did mention in the May primary for a full 2-year term, you did not win that primary. What did that teach you? How is that experience affecting this special election campaign?
Well, these two elections are so different. And that's one thing that I think we need to really center in this opportunity to inform viewers and listeners. The special election is to take office immediately, and that's only because we have no representation in Congress right now, right, due to the sudden passing of our congressperson. And so there will be change on the horizon in 2027 regardless, right? That election for the primary leading into the general in November will decide who will begin serving in 2027. But this interim gap, right, where we have so much acute pain, where the costs of goods are so high, and where people's experiences have no representation right now, I think that behooves us to pick somebody who is proven in leading in this community, who has elected leadership experience, who's ready on day one, and who has been doing the work to build relationships in the community and campaigning for over a year now. And I think that's what our campaign provides. It's a level of clarity. It's a depth of policy expertise, and it's also an awareness and connection to the people in the community and to their needs. And so I'm looking forward to beginning the transition to our change leadership that we'll have in January, but doing so in a way that really talks about this opportunity with us barely being in the minority as Democrats and our need to have representation that lives among us and that is focused on the issues of the day.
So you mentioned, of course, Jasmine Clark, who our listeners have also heard from in this episode, won the primary. But initially, before Representative Scott passed and he was planning to compete in the primary. In fact, his name still appeared on the ballot. That's
Right.
how close he died to the start of early voting. But initially, that primary was very much a referendum on him and the changing of the guard that you're referring to. Then he died, right? So how did you shift, or how do you shift in how you talk about those things? He was 80 years old. He had been in office for decades, and you and others were saying it's time to move on, let a new generation take place. That is happening. And again, but now he's passed. So how do you consider and talk about David Scott's legacy now that he's not your opponent? He's the predecessor who has passed away.
Yeah. Well, we have to acknowledge what has been, right? And anybody that has served in elected office for multiple decades deserves their flowers. And especially, David Scott, given his historic tenure as the first African-American chairman of the Agriculture Committee. And so we recognize all of the hard work that has gone into making sure that we get what we deserve in our community. There's a lot more that we need to do. And there's a lot of gaps that are going under-addressed right now, particularly with respect to constituent services, because we have no representative right now. I've been in D.C., I've worked in these communities in our backyard, in Georgia's 13th, right across our counties down here. But I also know how things work up there in D.C. And so to be able to enter on day one with the readiness and the clarity to move very quickly, but also to retain all of David Scott's staff, right? I want to make that clear that we don't have a lot of time to be, shifting gears, doing interviews, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, none of that. So we just need to make sure that everything that was already in progress continues, but that we're expanding in the direction and areas where we can. And that's where this presents a huge opportunity because, Democrats are barely in the minority and we have midterms coming up in November. So our ability to energize, our ability to galvanize voters, our ability to make sure that people feel like they're being represented well by somebody who is a member of their community and who will take issues and take Republicans to task on issues that they are leaving on the table, right? That's the real opportunity that this presents, and where I think, dynamism and somebody who's been connected to the community offers us a huge advantage in November, particularly as we're trying to make sure that Jonathan Ossoff is reelected as our United States Senator and Keisha Lance Bottoms becomes our next governor. You got to make sure you get folks off the couch and it gets folks excited about what we can do in November and in the future. And that's going to require vision. And those are the things that we've been talking about this whole campaign.
I know you're talking about getting voters excited, but I'm sure there are a lot of voters who are like, what do you mean I have to go vote again in July?
Yep.
But, you got to get the word out. Here's my last question for you. You and we did an interview, not recorded for the podcast, but for the AJC.com. And we pulled out the calendar and we counted up the weeks. And whoever wins this special election is going to essentially have 9 weeks total in Washington. It's not a whole lot of time. What can you accomplish with just 9 weeks to serve?
Yeah, we can center all the issues that we talked about in this campaign. I think that we need leaders who have been doing the work on the ground to lift up the pain points in our community and to begin to put policy issues on the table to discuss, and then we can build on them in the future, right? And so I've been talking about the Clayton County needing to have tax revenue from the airport since the beginning of this campaign, right? We've been talking about the chemical fires at Biolab and how that still has environmental repercussions in Rockdale County and the surrounding counties that need to be protected and regulated, right? We've been talking about data centers and how they're coming into communities, sometimes at the purview of the local jurisdiction, but sometimes at the purview of a county, or because they're picking unincorporated parts of county land and they don't have the regulation that they need. And so we need to be talking about the economy, right? The economic implications of all of these business decisions that are taking benefits from us as hard-paying, hard-working taxpayers, but not getting taxed and that money not going back into our communities, back into the small businesses, back into our schools as it should be. There are so many issues that we have already been talking about for over a year in this campaign that I want to begin to center with the power of the office. And even if it's just for 4 months, right? Any time served is time where you can be making a difference. And I'm young enough to know that, I don't know what the future holds. So to be able to at least begin learning where the bathroom is and learning the tricks of the trade earlier allows me then to begin to think about service later, if I'm so lucky.
All right. Well, we're going to have to end it there. Again, Everton Blair Jr., one of 6 candidates on that special election ballot to fulfill the remainder of Congressman David Scott's term in Georgia's 13th district. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Tia. Thanks, everyone.
Again, that was Everton Blair, former chairman of the Gwinnett County School Board. And now we're going to talk with Marcye Scott, David Scott's youngest daughter. Marcye, thanks for joining Politically Georgia.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we should just state qualifying had already happened for the primary for a full 2-year term. Again, your dad did qualify for the race. But one thing you and I talked about off camera for an interview is you had always wanted to succeed him in office, and there was some conversation about him not running for re-election and you running in the primary. Talk a little bit about that and ultimately what happened.
Yes. So my dad has been in Congress for over, let's say, I think it was going on 23 years, 24 years. And so from the beginning, we had always thought and considered one of us, either me or my sister, running after his, once he retired. And that was the plan. Actually, we were going to do it when the district actually shifted. So that would have been 2024. We thought that would be a good opportunity too. Because we'd already been in those counties. Those counties were a part of the 13th at the very beginning of the 13th's inception. So I was very familiar with a lot of the constituents and voters in that area. So we were saying, okay, that'll be a good time. He didn't want to, so, we went on and ran. He won that race. And so the whole agreement was, okay, now this time we're going to do it. Fast forward, and he decides, let me go on and qualify. So when he said that, I was like, okay, well, let's go. We got a campaign to run. And then unfortunately, he did pass in April. It was after qualifying and after the ballots had been already produced. So his name was already on the ballot, was still on the ballot, and they couldn't remove it. So, but yeah, this journey has always been that way. I worked with him not in his state rep. I was too young, but state senate, definitely all the way through a state senate. That was my summer camp, I tell people. So I didn't really we didn't go on vacations. Every 2 years of my life has been dedicated to campaigning and running and supporting him in his political career.
That puts context into why you did decide to qualify for the special election to finish out his term. Mm-hmm. But help people understand, because you've never held office before, you've supported your father, but what do people maybe not know about you and your own political aspirations?
Well, I don't think that the experience is only towards being elected. That's number one. Number two, I have been in the community and I've represented him in spaces when he couldn't, being in D.C. And Tia, me and you, we know each other. You've seen me around and at every basically event that he's had, from health fairs to job fairs. I've always been on the ground with him. And it was just a connection with people. I've always enjoyed that. It's hard being in front of people, in terms of the ridicule, in terms of people just feeling like they can say anything they want to you, but you have to have a hard shell. And I think I've grown into that at this point. But that is one of the things that kind of pushed me back a little bit. And I was very dedicated to his campaign and putting a lot of energy and focus on his race. And we were very instrumental in helping him develop some of the programs, like the health fair and the senior citizen fairs that we did. So it wasn't just that I just came out of nowhere. I've always been a part of the team and a part of his political career. It just wasn't that I wasn't the face. And a lot of people are like that. Now, it's not like you have to have experience, right, in order to run in terms of political experience being elected. But in my case, I do have the experience, and I have many years, especially in the 13th Congressional District. I grew up in that district.
Let me jump in because you are running to complete his term. Is your message mainly, keep the Scott name on the seat, or is there more to it than just the family legacy? What do you want to accomplish in this, what would be a short time in office if you're elected?
Right, very short time. And no, I wouldn't do it just if it was just putting my name on the ballot, because I don't think that I would get anything out of that. My thing is that the congressman had requested $40 million for his district. That needs to be finished. That money needs to come down to the district and to the different counties. I've met with each individual county leader, pretty much each one, and we've discussed this, and they're all behind me saying, yes, Marcye, please continue, make sure we get those funds down. They are actual projects that have already been identified and projects in the works that need this money. There is a very short period of time. And I don't think anybody, if they were experienced, if they had ran before, if they were the president, that they could get some of this stuff accomplished if they didn't know the specifics about it. And like we said, it's a very short period of time. So I'm not doing it for clout. I'm not doing it just to have my name there. I'm not doing it for a legacy of anything. I'm doing it because I know that that's what my father would want, is to finish that term for him and what he had promised for this district.
Well, I actually think that's a great note to end it on. So, Marcye Scott, daughter of David Scott, thank you for joining Politically Georgia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, now that we've heard from these 3 Democrats who are all running to succeed Congressman David Scott in office, there are a lot of things I found interesting after talking to them. For example, Jasmine Clark, at first, you might say, well, why wouldn't she run in the special election? She could get to Congress early and get to work. But for her, it was about also keeping her current constituents in mind as a state representative. Think about the special session that was held a few weeks ago. If she had resigned to run in the special election, her seat in the legislature would have been empty when redistricting, at least for a time, was on the table. Of course, it's really interesting to hear Marcye Scott talk about, she had always talked about succeeding her dad in office. It just happened on an earlier timeline than he or she had planned for. And then I thought it was also interesting that both Jasmine Clark and Everton Blair talked about they felt it was important to be on the ballot, not just for themselves and what they wanted to do for the district, but to help boost turnout and get Democrats energized going into the midterms. Especially in November, Jasmine Clark will be on the ballot against a Republican. That'll be the same ballot that John Ossoff is running for re-election as a Democrat. Keisha Lance Bottoms is running for governor as a Democrat. And she's saying, we got to boost turnout to help these other candidates. Everton Blair is saying this special election can keep voters energized ahead of the midterms. So Democrats are really approaching this election, as a body, as, candidates who all want to work together to help each other succeed. And I thought that was very interesting that they're thinking about the top of the ticket in those terms. But that is where I'm going to wrap up. It's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. Thanks again to Jasmine Clark, Marcye Scott, and Everton Blair for joining us. And thank you for listening to Politically Georgia. If you found us on YouTube, welcome to our channel. And please click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. It's AJC subscribers like you that make Politically Georgia possible. If you're not a subscriber, we invite you to join our community and help support local journalism. Subscribe today at ajc.com/start. We'll talk to you next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia. And we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.